Joining me today, one of the sharpest baseball bettors out there, MLB Action Network analyst, my colleague, the one and only Sean Zerillo, here for his State of the Betting Union post Memorial Day on our two teams inside the state of Florida, the Tampa Bay Rays and the Miami Marlins. How you doing, Sean?
I'm doing great. And, I bet the win total overs on both the Marlins and the Rays going into the year, and they're both pacing to go over those listed totals. So a lot of futures out there, a lot of player props I'm sweating due to dudes getting hurt, strikeout totals that'll never get there just because a guy missed one start or something like that. So it's nice to be recapping a couple of totals that are actually going my direction.
Well, not only totals, but you and I had a nice expansive conversation on the favorites before the season started, and you are all in on Kevin Cash, manager of the year.
Yeah.
What did you get it at, and have you checked it since? Because I'm thinking that price has shrunk by a considerable margin.
Yeah, that was up around 19-1. He is the current favorite. If you look at prediction markets, he's around 2-1, 3-1. I never thought that bet should have been higher than double their odds to make the playoffs. It was 6 or 7 times their odds to make the playoffs. They were projected to be the 5th best team in the American League East. And if they ended up making the playoffs, I thought there was almost no world where he wouldn't win the award unless one of the A's or the White Sox also made the playoffs along with them. So that was a great bet. I hope somebody, in addition to tailing that, also bet the Rays to win the AL East, because that was about 31. Now we can get into where I see current value on the AL East and whether it is the Rays or not. But at the time, that was the value bet. And I recommended the Jays at about 10-1, 12-1 last year in the preseason to take down the AL East. So 2 years in a row, I've identified the worst team on paper, in the AL East, to end up being the division champion, or at least having the value in the futures market to be the AL East champion. So a bit of an odd circumstance for back-to-back years that ended up being the case. But when you have these deep competitive divisions, the gap between the top and the bottom, I thought wasn't necessarily as large as the market suggested. And thus far, it has played out that way.
Yeah, and I mean it's a lot like the NFC East in that way, where there could be a different winner every year. The Yankees throw a little bit of a thorn in that theory just because of their exorbitant spending, but the Rays are on the opposite end of the spectrum, where you would expect them to take a dive in the wrong direction year after year, and they just never do. This team is just so consistent year over year. They're 6 games up on the Yankees as it sits right now. They've won 34 games, 60% win rate are the Rays when they are listed as an underdog. This is according to Team Rankings out there. Great site to go and check on such things. As consistent as they come, how are they doing it? What is it? What's the special sauce for the Rays? This fielding has not really been there, but they're hitting well enough, and the pitching for them is just tremendous.
Pitching tremendous, and that's where I'd worry that there is some regression due to come at some point, around a 3.50 ERA. But almost all of the underlying metrics on the pitching side suggest that they should be closer to 4. And I think you've even seen over the past week or so, they are starting to lose some of those close games, coin flip games that they were winning large pot earlier in the year, coming back against teams late in the game. You can't rely on that being sustainable. But I do think the biggest red flag is the fact that their actual ERA is around 3.5, expected ERA of 4.15, Sierra of 4, FIP of 4. So Sierra, FIP, those tend to be the most predictive in terms of forward-looking ERA for a pitcher, for a team. I think they are going to be about a half run worse in terms of their pitching going forward. But what is sustainable is the offensive contact. Now, they're not hitting for a ton of power. Obviously, they have Junior Caminero. But what they have done this year is cut down significantly on the strikeout rate. They were striking out about 23% of the time last year. This year, it's closer to 18%. And we're well past the point where that has stabilized in terms of a season-long metric. They've cut their whiff rate by about 4% as well, 4 or 5%. And their contact rate has gone up about the similar amount, 4 or 5%. So overall, they have clearly traded some power in exchange for contact. That's why they're hitting so well with runners in scoring position. I do think it is a philosophical approach just to put the ball in play and avoid the strikeout. That was what the Jays did last year in terms of their year-over-year improvements and making them one of the best teams in baseball, not only the American League. So defense, contact, I know you said the Rays haven't been as good defensively. They actually still grade out quite well defensively. And I do think that plays in to the pitching quality and the fact that, they have outperformed their underlying indicators by about a half run. But even going into today's slate, for instance, I don't project the Rays as better than a league average bullpen. So I always believe that this is an organization that is going to develop talent, not only in the offensive end, but especially pitching and in the bullpen. I just don't necessarily see the quality that they've pitched to thus far this season. I think they are projected to win about 88 games now still. You look at their rest of season pace versus what they were in the preseason. Again, closer to a 500 team expected in the preseason. The work they've already put in, they're pacing closer to 110 wins. But if you expect that they'll play closer to 500 the rest of the way, you still get them around 90 wins, and I would make them the second best team in the AL East. I would have the Yankees as the favorite, and I make the Yankees a value bet, actually. I make them closer to minus 180 to minus 200 to win a division. But that is the large takeaway from the Rays. I think the offensive success they've had is sustainable due to the contact improvements. The power has gone back a little bit as a result. That's always going to happen anytime you're making more contact. And the pitching is what would concern me in terms of regression the rest of the way. Now, what differs about this Rays team relative to other Rays teams in the past is the fact that they got new ownership at the end of last year. And there have been reports about their relative aggression in the trade market more recently, and the fact that they are willing to go out and acquire other players. They don't have necessarily have a ton of guys who can come up this year from the minors and add to their roster. Carson Williams may be the only guy who could be a significant contributor the rest of the way, but they do have a number of hitting prospects that they might be willing to flip for pitching or for other needs down the stretch here and actually make improvements, rare improvements to a Rays team at the trade line. So normally that would be like a huge red flag for me in terms of betting on this team or expecting them to do well going forward. I actually think this is a rare circumstance and maybe the start of a new trend where the Rays may be aggressive in the trade market.
Let's flip to the Fish. 10 and 12 since the calendar flipped to May. They are not as bad as some would have envisioned. You clearly saw some value on them prior to the season starting as you bet their win total over. Where are you on their pitching staff? Alcantara, has he turned back the clock at all? Is Yuri Perez living up to the hype? It all starts there for Miami.
Yeah, I bet the Rays win total over. They're pacing right about where I projected them. I had them at about 78 wins going into the year. They're pacing for 77. The updated blended projections from Pacoda, Fangraphs, etc., has them at about 76. So projected to reach or projected to clear that win total of 73 from the preseason. I do have some concerns, though, largely about the pitching depth. A big part of the reason why I thought the Marlins could take a step forward this year, not only the roster they had, improving in general and getting Kyle Stowers back from injury, Owen Casey maybe providing a power boost, hasn't fully come together offensively. They are stealing more than they have in prior years. They're on pace for about 50 more steals than they finished with last year. The walk rate is up a little bit, but their home run pace is down. Their power, like the Rays, is also down. Maybe Stowers having a bigger second half, or Casey, like I said, can improve that. What is interesting about the Marlins is the fact that their pitching is definitely improved, and I think they can sustain it actually even more than the Rays can when you look at the average fastball velocity up nearly 1.5 miles an hour from last year. Their stuff has jumped from 104, which is above average last year, to 104 now this season, 101 to 104. The body ERA, which is a pitching model, computer model ERA, has dropped by a full half run from 406 to 345, actually more than a half a run. Strikeout rate up, home run rate down. The one concern is that with the strikeout rate going up, the walk rate has also gone up. So clearly there's an increase in throw the ball hard. We don't really care if it's in the zone or not. We just want other teams to swing and miss. In the ABS era too, you can expect an increase in walk rate as well. So I think there has been an improvement in terms of pitching quality from the Marlins that is backed up by the metrics and that is sustainable going forward. My concern is that if they have any other injuries, this could collapse like a house of cards. Because what I really loved coming into the year and what I look for with any team, not only the pitchers on your major league roster, your 5 or 6 starters on your major league roster, but then your minor league depth that you can bring up behind them. Well, they had Robbie Snelling and Thomas White coming into the year who looked like quality reinforcements that they could bring up in season. Now both of those guys are hurt on the IL. Snelling done for the year. Remains to be seen whether White is going to come back. But really, it's just the fact that they've already had 2 of their key starting pitcher replacements hurt. They were throwing Chris Paddock for innings earlier in the year, ended up releasing him. Now Tyler Phillips is occupying the number 4 spot in that rotation and having to get his innings increased. Braxton Garrett hasn't really looked great. So I just worry that if Sandy gets hurt or if Yuri Perez gets hurt, and he's always an injury risk, that there just isn't going to be enough quality starting pitching left for them in order to get to that 500 mark. I really think the upside for them, even, best case scenario this year, probably still closer to 83 or 84 wins and just missing out on a wild card spot. But I do still think there's a downside where they finish closer to their preseason win total of about 73 if they sustain some more injuries the rest of the way. So I like what I've seen in terms of the improvements from their pitching staff. Just the offense has not really taken a step forward along with it. And that is something that I thought they would get this year. It's really high in Jacob Barcy. I love Stowers. I love that outfield in general. We just haven't really seen the jump up in performance from Miami offensively yet. So I think this team is probably still a year away. Got a lot to clean up on the defensive end too. But obviously seeing the pitching improvements is encouraging. Just the injuries that came along with it sort of knocked my opinion back to neutral on this team.
It hasn't slowed the team down from hitting overs. If you're an overs better and you've been betting on Marlins games, 62% to the over. WRC plus isn't outrageous. You mentioned the reasons why. Starting pitching has been decent. Bullpen is pretty good. How is this happening? I mean, is it just what you have mentioned with they're a lot more interested in the velocity of their pitches than the location of their pitches, and then that leads to some higher scoring games? But what exactly is it as far as the Marlins playing so often to the over?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think their offense is just a little bit underrated. I think their park, due to the fact that it is domed, and for such a long time, it's partially domed. It's a little bit of a weird one, but due to the fact that they've been such a poor team offensively for such a long time, I actually do think that gets baked into park factors a little bit. I know park factor splits home and away, and it's meant to adjust, for the relative contributions of how good an offense is and a factor for at home and away. I still think that, particularly good or particularly bad offenses can influence those park factors over the 81 game samples within an individual season. 81 games is really not like a humongous sample. And within one individual season, I think, you can sort of skew the data sample in one direction. So yeah, I just think the Marlins offense is better than people thought. But at the same time, they're still not hitting for as much power as I ultimately expect them to. But then just to reiterate, I think that's something that they're capable of doing going forward, given the production they've had to date relative to what I expect for them the rest of the way. Seen a breakout from Liam Hicks, which has been exciting. Joe Mack ended up coming up, which was probably, aside from Snelling and White, really the only other guy I'd identified as somebody who could come up and give them significant playing time this year. But no, I think what really stood out and what I think can lead to, or at least partially explain the pitching improvements, this is the first team who instituted pitches being called from the dugout near the end of last year. And a lot of other teams have followed suit, but something that they implemented throughout their minor league system, had a ton of success with, and then implemented at the major league level, ended up having a good September last year. I do think that is partially, can partially explain the increase in strikeout rate and potentially the increase in pitching effectiveness. I don't think it explains it fully because, as I mentioned, the stuff has increased, the velocity has increased. It seems like there is some intentionality with them just throwing harder and not really caring where it goes. You throw harder, you're probably also going to decrease your home run allowed rate as well, which they have. They're at 1.9 homers per nine. They were at 1.25 last year. So just bigger stuff, throwing it harder, getting more strikeouts, allowing more walks, but in turn, reducing the home runs against, I think is all positive improvements, along with getting the optimal pitching calls from the dugout. Just the offense is really the big piece, and, what needs to step up for them. So, in terms of why they've been an over team, it's difficult to explain because I would like their offense to be better. Their pitching has been better, but I think their offense can be even better than it's been. So I don't know if that over trend is necessarily that's something that's going to go away if they continue to improve offensively, like I would expect them to with a relatively young team.
And it ultimately comes down to where the odds makers set the line. Of course, that's a big part of all of this. Sean Zerillo, his State of the Union for our teams inside the state of Florida, the Rays and the Marlins. They say in baseball, don't check the standings until after Memorial Day, or at least on Memorial Day. Marlins in fourth in the NL East, Rays in first in the AL East. ActionNetwork.com is where you can find all of his great work, and on the Payoff Pitch podcast. Thanks so much, Sean. Appreciate the time.
Thank you for joining me, and good luck to our Rays and Marlins. Hopefully those win totals cash with these.
I am confident that they